This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mātauranga Māori, brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr Barb.
And I'm Trudy.
And today we're here in the studio with Greer Gilmore.
Welcome.
Welcome, Greer.
Thank you.
So Greer is a climate researcher, an MB Science now, Whitinga?
Whitinga. I'm not on that postdoc anymore. I just finished.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's good. It's always good to get something finished, isn't it? Although I'm not really sure that anything's ever quite finished in science. They seem to bleed on to the next project, don't they, as you're finishing publications and tidying up bits and things. That's just the nature.
But you started at Canterbury.
I started at University of Canterbury, yes.
Undergraduate Masters at the University of Canterbury, Christchurch?
Yes.
And MSc, you travelled all around the dry valleys, Antarctica. That sounds amazing. Was it cold?
It was very cold. Depending on where we were, some places, if you ended up in a camp that was shadowed in the shadow of a mountain or something for the whole day, it was freezing.
So when you say freezing, what do you mean?
Yes.
Like with wind chill, like negative 40. I guess.
See, that's more than freezing. That's 40 degrees less than freezing, right?
It's all relative. It's not that cold compared to how cold it is already there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you weren't just all at Ross Base or...
No. We weren't at Scott Base. So
Scott Base.
So my field area is in the Dry Valley. So what we did is we packed all the stuff into the helicopter. There was me and 3 other people.
So how did you get to Antarctica in the first place?
I think I went on the Starlifter, the US plane down to Scott Base from Christchurch. Yeah. It's a bit bizarre being inside a plane that's got a helicopter inside the plane at the same time as everybody else is inside the plane.
It's like a turducken, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I'd be looking for a seat close to the helicopter in case the big plane goes down.
I don't know. I don't think the helicopter would get out in time, would it?
Yeah. I don't care. It just made me feel better.
All right.
So we had it a bit different. Then
so this was still your master's, right?
This is my master's.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Awesome opportunity.
How does one get funding for that from a master's? I mean, nothing against your master's, but it's a master's, right?
So you take advantage of someone else's funding. So you had people in the department at Canterbury had funding to go and do some work, and they had split that up into several different research projects. And I picked up one of them, and they said, "Oh, Greer, would you like to go to Antarctica?" And I was like, "Doing what?" I was like, "Actually, you know what? It doesn't matter."
It doesn't matter. Yeah. Yes, was the answer.
Turns out I love sedimentology.
Wow.
So sedimentology?
So studying the sediments in the dry valleys. So the rocks in the dry valleys that were previously sediments. So
sediment is stuff that's just brought there by either wind or water, right? So it's it's rock that's been weathered down and then it's been transported there. So it's not bedrock.
No.
It's sediment, something that's been transported there.
Yeah.
And these dry valleys, are they in the middle of Antarctica? Or how are they geographically to where we think of the base on? Because the base is right on the edge, right?
Right on the edge. So I'm looking at my internal map, and it's hard to say north or south or east or west of Antarctica.
That's true. I was sort of thinking inland. Inland, right.
Yeah, so there's like the really high Antarctic plateau, there's the Ross ice sheet, Scott Base, and then in between there's like a mountain range and you have the dry valleys. So they're dry because you get these really strong winds flowing off the plateau, which dries them out, which makes them drier, even though all of Antarctic's dry.
It's like the Canterbury Plains.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say it's like your washing. I was going to say it's like your washing. Like actually, a windy day is really good for drying, sometimes better than a sunny day, right? Yeah. So it's not really the heat that's drying your washing; it's the wind.
Yeah,
and I guess that's the same with these dry valleys.
Yeah, very dry.
And it's funny because you don't really think of Antarctica as being dry, right? Because it's all ice, and we think of ice as water, and it's like
the desert.
Sorry?
It's a desert.
It's a desert, I know. But it's like sometimes it's really hard to get that into your head, like that it is actually a desert because it's cold.
Yeah.
I guess, and people, like our natural first thought from childhood books of camels and dune systems is that deserts would be, hot and sandy.
Yeah. It's just dry and cold.
Yeah.
And, so we were camping. So there was 4 of us in two tents, and so you'd have your little Scott tent, the classic triangle.
The classic teepee tent.
tent.
Oh, you don't have little pup tents?
No.
Like pop-up ones.
So some programs, they have a base camp and they have a kitchen tent and they have their sleeping tents, but because we were moving around, we had those 2 tents with ourselves in it, and then you'd have 2 2 beds in there, and in the middle you'd have your stove, and
Right.
then you'd kind of do everything in those tents. We didn't have any extra stuff because the helicopter would drop us off, we'd stay somewhere for 3 or 4 days, the helicopter would come in, we'd pack it up, they'd move us along, because we're trying to look at we're looking at the rocks along a whole mountain range, so we just kind of hopped along, looking at different
So
locations.
you're trying to get some sort of transect going or something?
Yeah, or just places where we could see different types of rocks, because you can't see them necessarily all in one place, depending on if they've been covered in snow or a glacier, or where you are.
Right, okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question.
Yeah.
Go on.
What about a bathroom tent?
So we had a bucket.
Right.
And you build, if you're up on the snow, then you cut snow blocks and almost build a wall.
Oh, okay.
That would be the bathroom.
Like a privacy wall.
Yeah, a privacy wall.
I mean, is it a privacy wall? Is it to stop your bum cheeks freezing?
Both. Because you're trying...
I'm just imagining if it's minus 40 degrees, I mean, that's kind of frostbite territory for not very long uncovered, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so you're using it to block the wind as well.
Yeah, and that's cutting down your wind chill factor as well. I know. I just remember when I was in Patagonia, and honestly, the wind was going.
Yeah.
Like it was so difficult. And when it was gusting, was the worst. But it was so difficult to have a pee on outside because it was just a mess. Anyway, it would be
downwind. You get a shiwi.
Yes, well, this was a long time ago. This was pre-shiwi.
The pre-shiwi era.
And do you have to take it back with you? Like, you take everything in and everything, right? But it'll be frozen.
It's all frozen.
Yeah, because it snap freezes, right? Just like, because they do those experiments where they toss their coffee in there or their Coke or whatever, and it freezes into a beautiful fountain.
We're going to have to interview an astronaut now because I've got questions for them on this subject as well.
I know, it's funny, isn't it? But it's the first thing that everybody thinks of. Like, when you're there...
What do you do?
How is that? And even, like, washing... Like I imagine it's
washing?
like
I don't think you bother.
I was going to say it's probably like tramping, isn't it? You're just like, I know, like
the shower when you get back to Scott Base is the best day of your life.
So Scott Base is kind of set out like a regular place, right?
Yeah.
It's got showers and I think I even heard that they have lettuce there.
Grow
in the shower?
No, not in the shower, in the kitchens. No, in the kitchens, like because you sort of think, is it like totally like canned food and dried food?
No,
but I don't think it is, right?
Yeah,
because especially during the summer, because there's kind of, I don't know how regular they are, but like I've formed the impression that there's kind of a regular kind of people coming and going on a sort of 2-weekly basis. So you kind of get fresh fruit
pretty much
as well. So as you're coming in with your helicopter and your gear, you're also bringing supplies in for the other people that are there. Do you know how many people are in Scott Base? I know it's different from summer to winter, but
I don't know. It's also different because throughout the season you'll get there's the staff and that kind of stays fixed, but then the amount of scientists who are there fluctuates depending on who's out in the field or what events are going on at that time, or if people are doing work out of Scott Base, or if you have a whole flight that comes in, or as soon as you get a backlog, like a flight doesn't leave or things can't get out,
then it
you get
must
a pile
get
up of
crowded.
scientists.
Yeah, I can see that. A pile up of scientists. What is the collective noun for a pile of scientists?
Well, I thought it was an argument the other day when I was in a meeting and it didn't go down well with the scientists that were there for some reason.
It's a discussion.
A discussion of scientists.
No, you're right. It's an argument. Oh, no, that's interesting. Yeah. So the bulk of the time you were there, you were actually out in sort of this four-man team. Were they
4 person?
4 persons, yes, of course. What am I thinking? So were you the only female out there?
No, one of my supervisors. So I went out with Margaret Bradshaw, who was like OG Antarctic researcher.
Right, cool.
And so and John Bradshaw as well, and another student. So there was 4 of us.
Right.
And we just share a tent, share the cooking, share the sciencing.
Right. And so what were you actually doing, like you personally? You were doing...
Looking at rocks.
Yeah. So were you drilling down and getting cores?
No.
Or were you just wandering around, taking pictures? Some geologists...
definitely a rock, yes.
Some geologists, they'll dig a trench, but you obviously weren't digging trenches, right? Or were you?
No, so we're looking at the rocks and we're taking samples to describe what the rocks are made up of, like what are they, how big is the grains in them, like are they sand, are they gravel, what proportion of sand or gravel, what are they made up of, is it made of like quartz, is it made of volcanic material? We also had it's so cool. So it's like almost like an old dune system, and you'd be walking across it. It's Devonian, 400 million years old. It's like ripple marks.
Oh,
and there's
really?
like dune, it's like sand dune kind of things, and there's little oh my goodness, I just had a complete trace fossils from like little critters walking across it. You can see like their footsteps and stuff like that. It's
amazing.
Pretty trippy.
Wow, that's kind of cool. Because Antarctica obviously wasn't always at the pole, right? It's kind of shifted around.
It wasn't always freezing cold either.
Yeah. So it's actually kind of moved as kind of, I'll let you explain. As Gondwanaland's kind of split up, it's kind of drifted around, as have most of the continents. Yeah. And so those critters that were running around, they're not there still, right?
No, there's just like desiccated penguins and seals in the dry valleys now.
In the dry valleys, yeah. So that's not modern, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's modern.
They like
so they go there by accident.
And then they die.
And then they die.
Yeah.
No, I feel like I've fallen into an episode of Ice Age. Were you looking at how the sediments arrived there, or where they come from, or?
I was looking at using, so you can kind of reconstruct or see the direction that the wind was blowing when they made the dunes, or that the water was flowing when they made the ripples, or what type of water it was. Like, was it a river? Was it like a lagoon setting? Was it marine? And so then using all the information that we collected from the rocks to create kind of like a paleo environmental interpretation. So what was the environment like when that rock was deposited 400 million years ago?
Right.
And where did the sediment come from? Like, is it similar to other things you see around Antarctica? Is it like this thing over there, that mountain over there has been eroded and the material's been transported here and as a kind of shallow marine or a deep marine or
right.
So some of these dry valleys were uplifted, or how did they get? Because you're saying they were marine.
Yeah, but there's lots of different layers within the rock. So the section I was looking at was what they call a transgressive sequence. So it goes from like a marine to a marine terrestrial, like a marine, shallow marine, and then like a beach sequence, I guess, which you see as you go down the beach. So, for example, out at St Clair, you get the dune deposits, and as you went offshore, you get something, and then as you went offshore, you get something else.
Right.
And those things get stacked on top of each other in time as you see the beach, as you see the water level change.
Right.
Does that even make sense?
Yeah, so it's the water level that's changing, not the land.
Or it could be both, but...
it could be both.
Yeah, it could be both.
Because I guess, like, there's this thing, isn't there, when the ice melts off it, the land bounces up because it hasn't got that heavy weight of the ice on top of it.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if it was the situation was the land coming up,
or was the sea
going up and down, or both. And your answer was clearly both. So bit of both.
I can't remember for that specific thing.
Yeah. Anyway,
we'll go. This really long ago.
Yeah, so let's move on, because that was your master's, right? That was really long ago. And so that was...
almost Devonian even.
Yeah. So really exciting, but also really long ago.
Yeah.
And after you finished your MSc, worked as an engineering geologist and site engineer on projects around New Zealand, particularly Christchurch, before, during and following the earthquakes. Yeah, so you were one of these lucky geologists who were in Christchurch over that whole earthquake period.
Yeah, lucky.
So it's a kind of a term, isn't it? It's like, is that lucky or not?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, I was there. So I got a job as an engineering geologist in a consultancy firm, and then I remained in Christchurch working there.
Right.
And then there was the earthquakes, and obviously our work changed quite a lot in relation to those earthquakes, and a lot of it became site investigations for people's residential areas, or a lot of work, how are they going to rebuild the wastewater treatment plant or the ponds, which will hit, all that kind of stuff. And also a lot of residential, so people who are looking to rebuild on their property, or what was the risk of more liquefaction on their property, or things like that. So
must be quite stressful, because you'd be dealing with your own experiences of earthquake, and also interacting with people who could be quite concerned about what's going to happen with their lives and their property and that stuff.
Yeah, quite concerned. And then also some people have had a lot of interaction with either their insurer or something like that, and some people hadn't had anything. So sometimes you go into a situation where people are quite stressed about it, or they're like, I still haven't heard anything, and you're the person who's right in front of them.
You're the person that they're
exactly.
actually talking to.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, for people who are there, and as Trudy was saying, it's like they've lived through the earthquake and all the aftershocks, and also the trauma of seeing, your friends and families and your own home possessions all being destroyed and stuff, and then wondering what's going to happen, and that is kind of that uncertainty. But it must have been traumatic for you as well, being there but also going back, or was it less traumatic, do you think, because you had more of an understanding of the process that was happening?
Potentially it was less traumatic because I didn't own a house. Like I was kind of like, I didn't have that responsibility to worry about. So that kind of took a responsibility, a level off that. Like it wasn't, our flat was okay. We were in a place that wasn't really affected. We kind of reached out to our neighbours and other people who were in the neighbourhood to see if they were okay. Like there's an old woman who lived over the back, and we were kind of over the fence like, are you okay? Every so often.
Crazy.
And then she'd bake for us. It was an ideal arrangement. But
And I guess it's true to say that liquefaction, am I saying that right?
Liquefaction.
There you go. Said it wrong already. Just as it was coming out of my mouth, I was thinking, that's not right. Anyway, liquefaction is kind of a thing that wasn't really well known at all as a process in lay people, like in the general populace. No one had really heard the term.
No.
But then post-earthquakes, it's actually written on an enormous number of limb reports.
Yes.
So, and I think that's quite an interesting phenomenon, is that it's kind of, it was there.
Raises people awareness of it.
Yeah.
But I think it was actually already on a lot of limb reports.
Yeah, it
but
was.
I think also a lot of people just don't necessarily read their limb reports.
Possibly.
Oh,
Maybe just that there was so long since there'd been a big earthquake in Christchurch.
Yeah.
In human terms rather than in geological terms, obviously.
But even within New Zealand, that created that much change. Like, even in New Zealand's people's memory, they don't think, when there was the Napier one.
Yeah.
But other than that.
The Napier one's kind of going out of, like, living memory as well.
Yeah.
It's like a thing that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's quite... I guess that happens all the time with geological stuff, isn't it? Because the things happen on a fairly regular basis if you're thinking in geological time, but actually because people's lives are so short.
Yeah.
And really once it's like you kind of are I don't know how to say it, like you've got some affinity with your grandfather's lives and your parents' lives, but you don't really remember past that third generation. And so when it's out of that space, it's kind of history all of a sudden.
It is, which I think is why when you have powerful oral histories like we have in this country that you can tap into, that they can be really, that they're really valuable, and that's a really good way of retaining that memory and passing it on. Because I'd say, unless it's written, Pākehā would be like, unless it's written down on a piece of paper, it didn't actually happen.
Yeah, well, that's our in geological terms, again, that's our more recent conceit, isn't it? Yeah. And there's a whole lot of stuff that happens that's not written down, and there's a whole lot of stuff, I guess, that is written down, but it's the person who's writing it's interpretation of it, right? So it's just one person, or sometimes there's co-authors and stuff, but if you've got a factual telling of a story, it's still a story from a certain point of view. Yes. And so what's left in and left out of that story, and what bits are remembered, like if when the events happened and what order they happened and what bits are there, is all part of the telling of the story. So whether that's written or told as an oral history,
doesn't matter.
It still has a point of view.
It still has value.
There. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting thing that we quite often, I think, in the Pākehā world, we sort of think, it's written down, therefore. And the other thing that I find really interesting is things that are written down, a couple of hundred years after the events took place, which is like me writing now in 2024 about things that took place in the early 1800s. I have no personal experience of what took part in the early 1800s.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like when you go back to, I don't know.
I suppose it depends what you're writing, because, I was talking with the ladies I lunch with on Friday, and there's someone buried at the Green Island Cemetery who was born in the 1700s and died in the 1900s. So if you knew that person, you would have connections back to all those events that happened through that time.
Yeah.
So sometimes writing after the fact is just capturing those oral history, stories, narratives that you've heard. You know,
Yeah.
like you think about some of the Roman philosophers or the historians are writing 200 years after so-and-so died. Well, perhaps they made it up, but there'll be something in the community that would have been spoken about at the time. You know, like if you think about things that happen, you know, even the Christchurch earthquake, there's stuff that will be written about in 100 years' time that has just come about because somebody's had a conversation with somebody who's triggered an interest in something else. I think sometimes we get hung up on how true or how factual it is.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I still think that it's a bit of a point of view, and the further removed you get from the events and when it actually happened, the less reliable the source is, just purely because human memory is so fallible, and retelling stories changes the story sometime and who you're telling it off. And also because I think as people get, well, and that's not always true. I was going to say as people get older, they get less likely to dish the dirt on people, but that's not true either.
No, that's not true.
You want to get more likely.
That's entirely,
I think everybody
driven.
experiences events differently.
Yeah.
So you're always going to have a different interpretation of an event. Some things might be you can't change certain bits on a timeline, like JFK was shot on such and such a day. But somebody from one side will view it from one side and someone will view it from something else. And I think that the challenge is to collate all those viewpoints.
Having more viewpoints actually gives you a
story as possible.
Better chance of getting closer to the truth.
There's no such thing as the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay. So after, so you did a lot of work on this kind of pre and post site engineering, just sort of working out properties.
What to do.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of that's still going on.
Oh yeah.
In Christchurch, it seems never ending.
But now I go back to Christchurch and I can't figure out where I am. I was there for like 10 years.
Yeah.
What street is this? I don't know where I am. I don't know. All the buildings look, well, for me anyway, a lot of the buildings look different.
I can see that.
And because some of the landmarks you had before are gone.
We're gone.
But then some of the new landmarks don't resonate. Yeah.
I just follow the blue dot.
And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I grew up in Central Otago, and Christchurch has always been a maze of one-way streets, and everything's so flat. Like
you got no viewpoint. How do you orientate yourself?
Yeah, no. So honestly, the only way I get around is the blue dot.
So that's Port Hills. You orientate yourself to Port Hills. That's how I do it anyway.
Yeah, someone told me that. That's they've only taken I don't know how long to tell me that.
Yeah. Anyway, so following that, what made you decide to do a PhD?
When I finished my master's, I still wanted to do more education, but I was like, I think earning money would be quite nice. And to be honest, it was really nice. Because by earning money, I could go and do things like, I'm going to go to the States and cycle from Vancouver to San Diego. Because, you saved up money to do it.
Yeah.
And
you're still young enough, right? You've got young legs.
I was. An ad came up. I saw an ad randomly for a PhD at Otago, and I applied for it. Don't think my skills were necessarily suited to it, but they obviously thought I had potential, and the two supervisors made a different project for me to do.
Oh, right. That's nice. So that was here at Otago,
at Otago.
In the geology department?
In the geology department, yep. Yes. So, and another opportunity where they say, oh, well, we have this opportunity, and you could go to the Subantarctic. And I'm like, okay, cool, great. Sounds great. Great.
I love the Subantarctic.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So what were you doing in the Subantarctic?
The moral of the story is never to say no.
Take those opportunities, my friend.
Yeah, just take the opportunities.
Yeah. So I was in Auckland Islands.
Whereabouts? In
Auckland
Enderby?
Island. Auckland Island.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Enderby, around there. Yeah.
Which are in the Subantarctic, not anywhere near Auckland for those out there. I've had that back. Yeah. So what were you doing there?
So we went down on the Otago boat.
On the frigate?
Boat. No, on the Otago.
University.
Polaris. The Polaris.
Right.
Yeah. Not the frigate.
Sorry. So hear my brother-in-law begging on me saying, it's not a boat, don't call it a boat.
Right.
I don't know if it's big enough to be a ship. And we were coring the fjords down there. So it's like The Auckland
so
Islands
still
have
in the
got-
water?
In the water. They've
Right.
got little mini fjords, like toy fjords, as opposed to the massive ones you get in Fiordland.
Right.
So they're a little bit easier to get sediment out of because the water isn't as deep. The sediment, dirt, whatever you want to call it, deposited or that's in the basin
Right.
is not as thick. So you can kind of get a better, you can get a more complete record because you don't have as much.
Is it not as thick because they're like each bit that laid down was a smaller amount because there's not as much mountains around? Or is it not as thick because it's been laying down for a shorter amount of time?
I think because like there's not as much vegetation, the catchments are smaller. Like the
Right.
whole thing is just shrunk
Just
down.
smaller, yeah.
Yeah, just smaller.
So you get sort of a similarly long time period,
Yep.
but just each layer is much finer.
Yeah, as much thinner. Whereas, you know, in Fiordland, if you want to get back to the same amount of time, you could be going 200 metres thick of sediment.
Right,
300,
that's a
more
lot.
than 200.
Right.
Yeah, you can't collect that on the Polaris, just FYI.
Yeah, okay.
The core barrel, maximum core barrel is 9
right,
metres.
because it's like off the ship.
But-
It would just
Yeah.
pull it down because it's too big.
Well, no, you just...
You haven't got enough stuff
core...
Oh, you haven't got enough
collect it.
space
Yeah.
to put it there. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, no, cool.
Yeah.
So how big is this thing that makes the core?
Makes the core...
Like the core barrel that you were talking about. Oh,
What is
just
that?
just like two hands together she's showing there to make a nice little...
It's
O.
like a postal tube.
It's like a postal tube. Wow. And it just has a tiny little core in the middle of it.
No, the core's like that big.
Yeah.
Oh, no, but the thing that makes it, like the thing that pulls it out,
Yeah, that's it. It's like a tube with a weight on the
end
end.
of it.
you don't literally throw it off the end because
You drop it.
with scientific precision.
All right, so you
Off the side
drop...
of it. And
So
the
it's like
weight
a
of it-
tube
Yeah.
that's empty.
Yeah, and I'm making a shooting noise downwards.
So I don't understand how the tube goes in.
So you've
how
got
do you
a
make the
barrel,
tube go
so you've
all the
got a
way
barrel,
in? Right. Has it got
and-
rifling on the inside of it to screw it in?
No, there's a barrel, and then there's a plastic liner inside the barrel, and you've got a end cap that you screw onto the end of it, which holds it in with like a core catcher thing, which is like a little cage on the end.
Yeah.
And then the weight and the
So just the weight of the tube pushes it into the ground.
and the momentum of the coring equipment, because it's got, you know, these big huge weights on it.
Or does it kind of like hammer it into the ground?
Does it hammer it, and it's like a little trigger goes off, and it I could have
like you, like a
confused.
Waratah thing.
No, because it's got a trigger on it,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
when
yeah.
it hits the sediment, the trigger goes off, and the I'm getting myself confused now. There's several different ways that you can collect the core.
right.
So there's a gravity core where you just drop it, and there's a piston core which sets off a piston, which the core barrel goes down at the same time as the piston comes up, and kind of the two of them at the same time.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
Equal and opposite reactions.
Right.
Something like that. I'm going to get in trouble for explaining that wrong now.
So just to be clear, it works.
There's no drilling involved.
Right.
So you're not like...
because people say drilling, like you like coring. It's sort of it seems
drilling, yeah.
like to me like there's going to be a drill, like some sort of a screw thing, but there's not.
Is it like
right?
coring an apple then? Because you don't use the drill when you're
Oh
coring
yes,
an apple.
okay, that's
Yes.
true.
Yeah.
Yes. Right, it's like coring an apple. Good analogy there, Trudy. Oh, thank God for that. Oh my goodness. I was
Should have drawn a picture, but it wouldn't work.
because I've seen pictures of the
Yeah, yeah.
cores, right? And I always
Yeah.
wondered how they get them out because they're really long and quite often they're in segments, right? When
Yeah.
they're doing ice cores.
Oh, but they do that different.
Right, okay.
There's like I wouldn't say a gazillion, but close to, of different ways to collect different types of core. Like ice cores,
right.
peat cores, sediment cores, lake cores.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
lots
Oh.
of different ways.
But
Well,
not the
that's-
band, the cores. Okay,
We
right.
can't collect them.
No. Okay, so what was the point of this?
What was the point? Why are we here?
What was the point of this whole PhD?
The point of this whole PhD. What was the point? So I was the aim of it was to reconstruct the location and the strength of the westerly winds.
Right. And why
In
are
the
the
past.
westerly winds important?
So the westerly winds go. Can I give you a little westerly wind spiel?
Yes.
Okay, cool. The westerly winds flow around Antarctica, like a big donut around Antarctica.
Yeah.
And they kind of go from southern part of New Zealand
Yep.
down to the subantarctic. And so where the strength of them and their location really influences climate, rainfall, ocean upwelling in the Southern Hemisphere. So like you look at a rainfall image from New Zealand and there's all that really intense rainfall on the west coast
Yep.
coming over. Those storms are embedded in westerly flow. So if you have really strong westerly flow over New Zealand, we get all that high rainfall that the Southlanders like to use for their farming and all that kind of stuff. Hydro lakes.
And that's because
the
wind's going across the ocean, picking up water, hitting the Southern Alps, dropping all the water so it can go over the Alps, and then you get the dry firn winds on the Canterbury Plains.
So and
that's all driven by the westerly winds.
Yeah, and that orographic rainfall pattern you see across...
Orographic, you're going to have to say.
Oh, sorry.
Orographic. Something about mountains, right?
Where when it hits the high mountains, you get the rainfall dropping out. So that happens across New Zealand, and then you see it in Patagonia as well. That's why it's really windy in Patagonia. And then on the subantarctic islands, their climate is really strongly coupled or really strongly driven by those winds as well.
Yeah.
And so what happens if they move south to the rainfall in New Zealand? What happens if they move south?
The islands.
No, the winds.
Sorry, the winds. Sorry,
if the winds move south, what does that happen to the rainfall in New Zealand? How is that going to affect our agriculture, our hydropower? How's it going to do all those things? If they move south, how does that change?
Because if you don't have the winds, right,
we won't get the water.
You won't get as much water.
Yeah, if they're not hitting the inland lakes there, then you're not getting the hydropower because you're not having the winds. You don't get the rain hitting as the winds are trying to get over the mountains, right? So that's the kind of whole.
Well, what would make them move?
Just life, man.
The universe as we know it. Yeah.
So that's part of climate change, isn't it? It's really is the whole thing about climate change is we're just. It's funny because we talk about degrees, a couple of degrees here, a couple of degrees here, and I think in hindsight we did the whole of humanity a massive disservice in the SciComm and the PR, like the way we went about explaining climate change in the beginning, and that kind of got a little bit sidetracked because it's not about today's temperatures 2 degrees warmer than yesterday. It's about the fact that all of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is adding energy into all the systems in unpredictable ways. Or sort of predictable ways. And I think that's where we should be talking about climate change as being driven by high energy, and that's why we're getting bigger cyclones, bigger storms, more disturbed winds, higher, more droughts, more fires, more extreme events of all types.
Yeah.
And it's hard to kind of get your head around that places could become both drier and wetter, which is the prediction for New Zealand, right? Because sometimes it's going to be more dry and sometimes it's going to be wetter because you're going to get those extreme floods, extreme storm events. And I guess your part, you're looking at the wind, which is quite important, and how that's driving. Or correct me if I'm wrong there, right?
No, so we're trying to look. So if we can go back in time, and into periods when we think the climate was similar to what it's predicted to be, and we can say, okay, so
and that's a long time back, right? So that's like, what are we thinking there?
So within kind of the last 20,000 years,
right?
So that's baby geological time.
I was going to say it's a very long time.
Okay, sorry.
Geology.
Yeah.
So we can go back to those times and say, okay, so in these periods when we think that the climate was more similar, or it's a different state to what it is today. What were the winds doing? Where were they located? What was it doing to the rainfall? How much effect did that have? And we can I guess see how that would play out in the future. Like this, that can kind of offer us an insight into how that what would happen in the future outside of modelling, like people who not modelling, but people who do like people who put who do climate modelling.
Yeah, so you're looking at the past and trying to make some sort of an analogy to what might happen in the future with future climate change by what has happened under
different states,
or similar, or because
we just want to see
make predictions, right?
Yeah, so this is what's happening now. If we changed it slightly, then this would be the outcome, and if we changed it, this would be the outcome, and what all those outcomes and how do they change in the different areas, right? Because that might be that you what happens in New Zealand is different to what happens in the subantarctic, is different to what happens in Antarctica.
Yeah, obviously, because they're all in different places and they're controlled by different weather systems.
But the winds affect all of those places.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a way of, and the winds affect all the places that are in its path. So Patagonia, all the oceans. That's why they're so important when you think about the carbon cycle in the Southern Ocean and upwelling around Antarctica and melting of the ice sheets. They kind of bring a lot of different processes together over a large topographic, like a large scale.
Yeah, half the globe, basically.
Yeah. Approximately.
No, it's interesting, though, isn't it? Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, obviously, because you've been studying it for a long time. Yeah. No, but it is interesting, right? Don't want to be flippant about this.
Yes, okay, I guess.
I mean, you can imagine, like, in a perfect scientific world, like take out all the humanity and everything of it. If we were just trying to work out how the weather, how climate change would affect the world, we would just like pull a lever and change this little bit and then see what the consequence was. Pull another lever and change this bit, like ramp up a little bit of rain, ramp up a little bit of whatever, and see what the consequence was, and then we'd get a pattern. And I guess that's what you're trying to do, but instead of doing it by pulling levers on a large globe now, because we only have one Earth, you're using that same Earth in different time periods to try and pull apart what those levers were that were doing things then, and then say, okay, well, this was different then, so that meant that this was happening. And so then trying to get a picture of all of those big global variables and how they're affecting and how they might affect our big scale climate things in the future, the near future.
The near future, yeah. That's right. Was I meant to reply to that?
No, I'm just trying to clarify in my mind that's where we're going. How did you get into this in the first place? So we sort of jumped in when you were doing your masters, but how did you, like when you were a kid? What made you did you always want to be a geologist? Did you always want to go places? Did you always want to go to Antarctic?
I always wanted to go to Antarctica.
Did you?
So that's one of the reasons I went to Canterbury, because they did Antarctic studies. So they did Antarctic studies.
So it didn't just happen that there was this like masters that were there. You had your eye out for it. You were like, you must have done.
That was good timing for that masters though. Yeah. That was good timing. That was
But I would like to predict that had there been a poster anywhere on the Canterbury campus, you would have seen it if it said Antarctica.
Would have spotted it.
Yeah.
I really like doing field work.
Right.
So I really like being outside and doing stuff like that. And I thought, geology sounds like a good, sounds nice. And then I went away and did a gap year after high school.
Right.
And then when I came back from my gap year, I still wanted to do geology. So I was like, well, that must be a good sign. And so then I went to Canterbury and geology.
And you always thought that you would go to university? You got family that's...
No, I'm the first. So my auntie went to university.
Right, interesting.
But none of... and my siblings, my younger siblings went to university.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm the first to do...
But you always thought that you would go to university? Or?
Yeah. I don't know why. Just seemed like a good idea.
Yeah, no, it's interesting,
like fun.
isn't it?
I guess there's nothing else that I wanted to do more, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Oh,
It wasn't like, but I really, really want to do this instead.
And you'd already done your gap year.
Done my gap year.
So you'd done a bit of travel, came back.
Yep. Went to Europe, did a bit of travel, saw stuff, did a little bit of work, and then came back again. Didn't really feel like staying over there at the time.
Right, okay, yeah.
It's a little 18-year-old baby. So tiny. So young. So I came back to Canterbury and did that, which was really good. Right. And I really, really loved it. And turns out I do love doing field work.
Yeah,
That was great.
and you still do field work?
I do. I was thinking the other day, I haven't done field work since May last year. It just makes me feel a little bit sad.
Yeah, I think that's a general thing. It's really hard as you go up in your career to keep doing field work, and you end up applying for money.
For other people.
To
do the things
which
you
is a bit
like.
sad.
I know.
Yeah, so
It
I think.
sad.
But obviously, your supervisor was still going to Antarctica.
Yeah.
So, baby, when you were in Antarctica, were you each doing different things, or did it take 4 people to use the machines or the equipment? Or
No, we weren't doing different things. It's just that for safety and their experience, you need more people there. So there was other people who were kind of working on things that were adjacent to what I was doing.
Right.
So they were doing some research and I was helping them, and I was doing some research and they were helping me, like the students help each other out. And then the faculty who were there, they were the leaders of the thing. Like we couldn't just, the students couldn't just go by themselves. So they have the leaders of the expedition or the event, as they call it in Antarctica. So they had to be there for that. Yeah.
Interesting. And what do you think is the worst thing about field work? What's the worst experience you've ever had? I'm going to ask you what the best is.
It can't have been that bad because I can't remember it.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
I don't know, because it's like you're out there. It's something that's hard. Like you're in like the worst weather. It's ridiculous. But it's like a means to an end, and like maybe it's type B fun.
Oh my goodness! I was just going to say that. We had this big discussion
on Otago Access Radio.
We had this big discussion on the weekend about type 1 and type 2 fun, and type B fun is the same as type 2 fun. It's like not particularly fun while you're doing it, but then when you finished it, it's like really fun.
But like most of it is fun while you're doing it.
Yeah.
But when you're like
there's a lot of type A, type 1, type A fun as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, because you're out there with like your colleagues or your friend, who are sometimes your friends as well, and you're all kind of out there doing it, and I don't know,
A
it just
shared
makes it
purpose, shared goal.
You're not there by yourself slaving away in the snow, being like, this is terrible.
Yeah, as opposed to lab work, which quite often is done by yourself.
Yes, it is done by yourself. Often in a room with no windows, like a dungeon.
Flick the switch, Igor. But not everybody. Surely, it must be times in field trips not everybody gets on.
Oh yeah, definitely. And
especially long ones, I guess, in cramped conditions.
And long ones, and I think long ones with the more people you have. Like when there's less people, you kind of just deal with it. But the more people you have, the more likely you are that there's going to be people who don't get along.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, yeah.
So if you keep it small, it's like going tramping.
Yeah. If you've got four people, it's all good. Sorry, Trudy.
Tommy, should you and I just leave the room and let's...
Sorry, Trudy.
Anywho.
So, any results? What do we think is going to happen with these winds?
So what we've seen in some of the work I've done in New Zealand is that we have periods of time when the winds are a lot weaker or they've moved further south, and you get much drier conditions. For example, I was doing work in Otago, like just south of Lake Wakatipu, and they're much drier, and there might even be evidence for periods when there's like kind of drought-like conditions. So, it's near Mavora Lake, so it's not dry, but it's not really, really wet, but those areas could become a lot drier. And whether these records can be used as a record of past extreme dry periods, and how does that look across other parts of New Zealand or other parts of the South Island? Like how much does that affect? What effect does that have on? What effect would that have on our larger lake systems? What effect would that have on farming,
tourism,
drinking resources? Just even the health of things like braided rivers and stuff like that, or Mahinga areas or anything like that, because if you reduce the amount of rainfall that's coming in, especially if things are being taken out of those river systems, so you've got allocated water.
So there's more extraction now than there was 200 years ago, right? Because
a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, if we're taking water out for farming and for irrigation and for town water supply, and that's all water that's not running down the rivers, right? And and obviously the hydroelectric systems change the water ways quite a lot, and they're quite finely tuned on an amount of expected water, right?
The amount of expected water, but if those allocations exceed. If there's a reduction in water and the allocations of things exceed it, like where is the line? Like, do you say, well, we keep the allocations, or do you say we keep the river healthy? Like, I don't know how that works.
Oh, I would say you should keep the river healthy. And I mean, you kind of, I think that we need to really, as a society, move away from absolute amounts.
Oh, yeah.
Apart from anything. Because if the amount of water coming into the system is changing, then surely the amount that's going out needs to change as well. So you can't take more water from a system than is there.
So instead of having like cubic
meters, it would be like or
a minimum flow of the river is meant to be this. It's like Yeah.
But then it's, you wonder why, I mean, that's part of it, is having minimum flow, so it's always there. But even that's not the whole story, because rivers need to have big surge events. They need to have times when there's a lot of water in the river, because that is part of the way that the processes in the river sort of function and stuff.
Yeah,
so, I mean, we're straying outside of we're straying a little bit outside of your direct field there. But, it's interesting, because it flows into a lot of things, and a lot of things that, we're talking about at the moment with the Otago Regional Council and all the councils, the DCC, the Queenstown Lakes District, Dunstan, and there's quite a lot of council work, and of course the central government as well is talking about carbon emissions. But then you're talking about carbon emissions. As soon as you're talking about carbon emissions and carbon plans, you're also talking about climate change, because that's the whole reason that we want to slow down the amount of energy that we're adding into the system.
But that's like some of the work that I do now. So the work I do at the moment for my postdoc is in Fiordland, and we're looking at how much carbon is being buried or has been buried in Fjordland, and how does that look under different climate states, or how does that compare, for example, in Doubtful Sound, where you have the water coming out of the tail race from Manapoti, or compared to a a fjord that has had no changes made to it. What are we looking at? How has it changed through time? So that's
how does it change through time?
Can you ask me in like 2 years?
Okay. I'll come back to you in 2 years' time.
So the cores
Yes.
and the westerly ones, they give you a time frame, like it changed for this period of time?
Yeah, so we take, like, if you have little bits of vegetation like trees or leaves or something, you take them out and you radiocarbon date them, and they give you an age, and you can
it's always down to the plants. Honestly, the world without plants.
Here we go. Botanists.
But any record that we generate, any other analysis we do, is kind of meaningless if we don't have a radiocarbon age model.
If you don't have a date on it.
If we don't have a date on it.
Look at
this beautiful squiggly line.
Yeah. But what does it mean? You don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
So in some places it's easier to get targets for that kind of thing, and so your life becomes, it just makes it a bit easier. In some places it's quite difficult, and you have to, sieve a lot of sediment and see what tiny bits you can pick out. Then you have someone sitting next to who's like, oh, I just found a leaf.
Smack. When the field trip goes pear-shaped, listeners. So if you find a leaf, just keep it to yourself.
It's a bit, I guess it's a bit like tree rings, right?
Yeah.
So you can sort of
Yes,
like once you've got a sequence, you can kind of line up another sequence from close by, or not.
Only if they have layers in them that you can compare.
Yeah,
or
like a volcano or something. Does that layer?
People use like tephra layers.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Well, I was just thinking like if you've got a layer of ash, but I mean I don't know if that happens in marine.
Not so much in the fjords because everything gets
washed,
remixed.
Yeah.
Like it's not really laminated, I guess you could call it, like not really
because
layered.
that's what happens in lakes more, isn't it? You get
yeah.
more because it's just stiller, the water. So everything sinks down calmly to the bottom.
Yeah.
But then when you're out in the marine, it doesn't happen like that.
It just mixes up, and then you have, like in Fjordland, you get the marine stuff coming in from the marine, then you get all the stuff coming down the rivers, you get all the landslides coming in from the sides, you get all changes in the circulation.
I don't even know how you begin to sort that out.
Carefully.
Carefully.
Yeah. Do you get animals that are just burrowing into the ground as well in the marine?
I think so, but that's more in the recent.
Oh, it's just in the top.
Yeah, in the top. Yeah. So you kind of you can't necessarily get, because for example, if they do ice cores or the layers from Lake Oho that they collected, you can, some of them, if they're fine enough, you can do like layer counting. You can be like this year, this year, this year, this year. Whereas we kind of take it and you'd be like, this bit encompasses, this centimetre encompasses 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years because it's mixed, or it's just the rate that the sediment falls in the fjord isn't as high.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're just predominantly marine stuff though?
At the moment, but I was, well...
Obviously when you're in the dry valleys you were.
I dabble. So marine and... so the last part of my postdoc, the first part I did, collected peat cores from a peat bog on Campbell Island in the sub-Antarctic.
Nice.
So yeah, lake cores, marine cores, peat cores, deep marine from Antarctica, which is kind of different from the fjord cores.
Right, because you're way out at sea.
Yeah, you're like in a deep ocean, but like it's still on the continental shelf, but it's really deep. Whereas like the fjords, I mean, they are a couple of 100 metres deep, but the ones in the Auckland Islands are only like 15 or 17 metres deep, and then you have the ones that are like way offshore, which are where the water's much deeper, and the processes and stuff like that are much different to what you get inside in the fjord.
Wow.
Like the circulation and the currents and all that is really different. So, and the type of sediment you get deposited is different.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It is.
It's very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, we've got 5 minutes left.
5 minutes. Oh,
what
no.
have we not covered that you're just dying to tell us about?
I don't know. What do you want to know?
I like to know everything about geology.
Yes,
I really do.
does.
Like, do you get fossils as well in your cores? You get these little bits of leaf, but they're not really fossil, are
they're
they?
not really fossil. No, they're not fossilised. No, don't get fossils. But for my the Antarctic section of my PhD, where I was using a marine core, we're looking at diatoms, which are like little silicious microfossils that live in the water column.
Yeah.
And you use
they're
those,
just made of silicon, right?
Yeah,
and
made of silica. Yeah, and so you use those. So in a dark room with no windows, you count them. You count them, and then you use those to reconstruct like what the sea ice and what the what the circulation was doing, because each species wants to live in a certain place. They
Really
they prefer a certain place. So
how do you know that?
because people
have done that before.
People have done it
People of the
before.
past,
Yeah, right.
So people have worked out where some of these were based on the environment, and then you can kind of use it.
They do modern things. So they collect they collect modern surface water, or they do sediment traps, and they go, okay, so in this area, under these conditions, this is where this species lived. And then so you go, okay, thank you very much. And therefore, in the past, that's what the sea ice was like, or that's what that was like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And silica they leave behind. There's the really cool little bits of silica on the edges of grass as well, that they can do a similar thing with. Yeah, it's really cool. Like cutty grass.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cutty grass. Oh my gosh, I haven't heard it called that for ages.
Cutty grass.
Oh, look out, it's cutty grass.
The bit that cuts you is like little tiny little bits of silica.
Yeah. Elephant grass, is that what it's called? I can't remember.
When I was a kid, it was called cutty grass.
It was called cutty grass. Yeah, totally.
You and I know what we're talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
So where did you grow up?
Tauranga.
Oh, right. Not from the south here.
No.
Crazy.
But I left Tauranga and I never looked back.
Yeah. Came to the south and stuck with us.
Came to the south and then came further south.
Right.
To Dunedin.
And you like going even further south.
I like going even further south.
No,
yeah. There's no university on Stewart Island. It's very disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
They need like a little campus. Like Auckland's got Lee Marine Reserve.
Oh, yeah.
We need one of those.
So we need to move the Portobello one to Akiura, is that what you...
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm suggesting there. Anyone wants to take me up on it? It's a fair way to go. Hey, this has been very interesting, this talk today. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
No, it's great to hear this. Do you, just before you go, I know that geology in the past has had a reputation for being very male-gendered. And probably quite white as well. I noticed that your fellowship have you noticed, just quickly in the last couple of minutes that we've got left, have you noticed that over time there's more of a balance, gender, ethnicity wise?
I think in the undergraduate and postgraduate space there's more of a gender balance than there has been previously, but that still isn't necessarily translating up. We still lose people as they go up.
Into
lecturer,
postdocs,
assistant, lecturer, senior lecturer, and that continues to drop off. So whether that's not moving up, I can't really comment on diversity because I haven't noticed that, and I don't know if it's different at different universities or different research institutes. Seems to be my team, half and half. Yeah, it is a bit different.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're celebrating at the moment, of course, because Emeritus Professor Daphne Lee.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's a big thing coming. And obviously your supervisor for your masters was
female, and my PhD supervisor as well. I've only ever had male and female, but my main supervisors have always been female supervisors, which has made a big difference, I think.
Was that a conscious decision, you think?
No, it wasn't actually. It's just how it worked out. Oh. But I like it that way. Yeah. And I hope to be able to do the same for other students.
Yeah, interesting. Ooh. Hey, thank you very much for coming along, Greer.
Thank you.
It's been amazing. You've been listening to the OI podcast. If you particularly like this episode with Greer, we think you'll like our previous interviews on ancient DNA and an extinct duck with Associate Prof Nick Rawlins, and climate issues with Prof James Renwick.
You can support the production of the OA podcast by becoming a member for the price of a coffee. OI, I don't even know where I am. The price of a coffee at www.otago-institute.org.
And of course we will offer Greer the membership for free for the first year. Thank you very much for coming along. You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.